product, tough product, strong root system, excellent emergence.
Good morning, my name is John McNamara. I'm the Wilbur Ellis agronomist at the Plattsmouth location. Welcome to the 2020 Minard Plot Tours. We've done these for a number of years in more of a one-on-one with the growers throughout the summer. This year, due to the worldwide pandemic, we're going to come to you via the internet. And so what we want to do is try to show you a few things of what we got going on at the Minard plot, not only from a developmental standpoint, a genetic standpoint, a soil fertility standpoint, and as we progress through the summer, we're going to also look at agronomic updates, whether we have disease pressures and those types of things that set up. So we will kind of update this on a frequent basis, somewhere in that 7 to 10 day basis, as we see more and more developments come up. We thought we'd take the initial swing at this morning and talk about the makeup of the plot, some of the things that we've noticed so far, and we will proceed from there. So, a little backdrop on the corn portion of this. As you'll see a break here, and this is the beginning of our corn trial. This whole trial was planted on April 10th. From a collar standpoint, you know, we can see that the developmental standpoint, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're working on the 6th collar. Okay, growing point is almost out of the ground. So when we're looking at the growing point and the development, corn historically needs somewhere in the neighborhood of 600 heat units from the time it was planted to get it out of the ground. And we can look at some developmental things as far as seminal root development, secondary root development, and this is typically normal for corn this big when you look at the root mass. Well, remember, corn can root to 4 feet tall, but most of the action from a nutrition and a water uptake is done in the top 18 inches historically. So when we're staging this corn, first leaf out really doesn't count. Here's your first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, working on the 7th collar. Doesn't seem like you can do this. However, you can find the growing point, and why this is important is when you're staging herbicide applications, when we talk about ear and kernel development within the ear. Right there, the tip of the knife, right about right where my thumb is, that's where the growing point is. A little bit further, there's the beginning of the tassel. Doesn't look like it should be, but you can see all that. See that tassel in there? And if I was good enough, I could show you some of the ear primordia, like there, that have begun to develop even at corn this size. So a little further backdrop on the corn. We talked about it being planted on, I think, of the April the 10th, if I'm correct. We had a full rate of Harness Extra with 175 pounds of nitrogen on it. If you look at some of the soil tests that we do annually here, if anything that glaring stands out is the soil pH. Soil pH of this piece is 5.3. We have ranges within our plots of 5.3 up to 7.8. That's done by design to help you look at genetic performances in all kinds of scenarios. It's just not the most adaptable one, or it's not the most fertile one, or maybe it was planted early or late. This allows you, the grower, to look at everything that we have in our makeup from a standpoint of how it adapts to those growing environments. So as an example, a soil test taken last year would indicate that we have, again, a soil pH of 5.3. Our soil organic matter is quite high for this area, 3.3 is southeast Nebraska. Our residual nitrate was 20. From a phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, calcium, cation exchange, and sulfur conditions, everything was medium to high from an average standpoint. And what we're looking at here is basically from left to right as I stand on it. Corn hybrid of the DeKalb 7027, same hybrid here on my right. But if you notice, you got about a collar, maybe almost 2 collar difference in staging. So if we look at this one without the starter, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 full collars. It's kind of working on its fifth. A full collar difference isn't that big of a deal. However, it does show you the benefit of what this test is trying to show you. To my right is without a starter. To my left, as I stand on the brake, is with a starter. That starter was 5 gallons of a 624-6, or a Wilbur Ellis product by the name of Blue Zone. It also has a little dab of zinc and ethos with it. Zinc is kind of a lost leader as far as what it does within the corn plant. And you wouldn't think that we would be needing something like that. However, given the conditions of this spring, where it was planted around the 10th of April and just basically sat there. It was warm, but not warm enough. And it was in a position where it really couldn't get up and growing quickly. Starters help you out. Now, the other thing about this is that when we start talking about trace elements, sulfur, zinc, calcium, magnesium, manganese, boron, when we start thinking about high yields, when we think about southeast Nebraska for about the last 8 years now, we've been on a production roll. Average yields have been well past 200 bushels. Even in the worst or most difficult growing conditions, when you start fertilizing for 150 or 175 bushel corn and you keep bringing out 200 to 225, in time you will mine that soil down even to the trace elements. Starter fertilizers are the best way to place fairly immobile nutrition in the root zone where it can utilize it the most and be most efficient with it. And so this is an attempt to demonstrate that from a standpoint of a starter versus a non-starter. So when we talked about the benefits of zinc, zinc adds to the plant synthesis of growth hormones and proteins, is what it's elementally meant to do. It's needed mainly for the production of chlorophyll and carbohydrate metabolism. So I mentioned talking about corn in cool weather conditions and that type of thing, and remember that the corn plant that's developing up until the growing point reaches out of the ground is using that kernel as a food source to get it up and growing, and zinc aids in that, and I think that's a very good example here of what it's doing for you. Zinc's also essential for the transportation of calcium, and here again, not a real big thing when we talk about the nutrition aspects of corn production. Calcium isn't one that surfaces. We always talk about nitrogen because it's the largest macro element that the crop generally uses. However, when we start talking about corn that is historically over 200 bushels, trace elements such as calcium come into play. So the nuts and bolts of this is that a 200 bushel corn crop will pull about a ½ pound of zinc out per acre in both the grain and the stover production. So a pound of zinc in a starter application is very well versed and very well needed. Here we are in our population study, and a residual grower question every year, usually around March, is that what's the right population for the genetics that you purchased last fall? And I don't really have an exact number. It's more or less how you want to manage this corn and what you're willing to put with it. We've talked a lot about nutrition with higher populations, the ability of hybrids to flex in various conditions, and everybody's situation is a little bit different. So what we've done is we've gone and planted 8 rows of various populations. Here's 24,000. Now that, in my mind, is very low with today's genetics that are available. Anything under 25,000, in my opinion, is leaving a lot of money on the table. Corn is a high-risk, high-reward crop. So when we get lower than 24,000, I think you're going to have the ability to yield a lot more if you just up your populations a little bit. So what we've done is we've looked at 24,000. Here we have 28,000. Here we have 32,000. And finally, our high rate is 36,000. And that's high for dryland production in southeast Nebraska. Every portion of the country is going to vary with that. but that 24 to 36,000 will cover most everybody's planting populations in dryland scenarios. You know, historically, our rate of return on our investment is what I should say, is kind of around 32,000 from how much you spend in extra seed, fertility, and management versus 36 or maybe 28,000. We'll see how this goes throughout the rest of the season. However, 36,000 looks pretty good right now on the 4th of June. So in addition to what we've tried to do with the starter trial as well as the corn population trials is look at planting depth. Another residual question as far as how deep should I plant my corn? And that usually resides from corn grade or weight that the grower has purchased throughout the season. Geez, I got really small corn. It's only 30-pound stuff and it's really light. Should I plant it a little bit deeper? And academic studies for years and years have shown that corn size really doesn't equate so much to corn yield. Depth control is essential. Spacing is essential when we're trying to grow high-yielding corn, or corn in general. So as an example of that, can't really regulate doubles so much, but I can control a little bit as far as the depth control. And every grower has experienced this. Maybe you found a compacted area where you've loaded trucks or high traffic areas around gateways. Maybe we've had certain clay types that are stickier than others and they're bound too hard, or they haven't been worked in a terrace channel for a number of years. Compaction exists to some degree. And this would be a good example of the unit basically coming out of the ground. So again, this was dropped at 32,000. This was specifically done at 1 inch deep. So when you look at this, being the 4th of June, we've got a normally emerged plant, about V6. Here we've got one plant next to it that is barely V1, or one collar, and we've got gaps. And we've got sizable gaps within each row. If you remember, when you're taking your stand counts, a 30-inch row, step off 17.5 feet, and that will give you basically an average of what your corn population is. When we look further down the road, we can see even larger gaps, upwards of 20 feet in places. Now this is just one row, but if you look at the adjoining row, it's a good example of what you might find in compaction. All right? So we have taken stand count, and again, this was dropped to 32,000, of viable plants that are emerged. We've only got 14,000 on the 4th of June. Now, the other thing you got to remember is, even though this plant is emerged on the 4th of June, will it make an ear? Are we going to be able to get it pollinated or make that nick on pollination time? The answer is generally no. When you look at, here's another one that you can look at that's very small. That generally turns into a weed, so to speak, and never really bears any amount of kernels on those ears. So even though you might count 12 or 14,000 on the 4th of June, you're likely going to harvest much less than that. At this stage of the game, even though it's June, I would rip this corn up because, again, the growing point's out. You're going to have to do that with tillage so that some of your initial stand doesn't become a volunteer crop. And I would go ahead and replant that. I would replant it probably about 10% thicker than your normal plant stand is, just to encourage interplant competition and get this corn crop growing quickly. If you look further down the road, now we go into 2-inch planted depth corn. And you can see not only the difference in stand and emergence, but also the true color of it. And the hybrid's all the same, population is the same. The only thing that we changed here was the seeding depth. So we went from 1 inch to 2 inch. And when you look at even further, looking at the 2-inch versus the 3-inch stage of things, these still look like, from a visual standpoint, like your 2-inch corn, a little taller, and kind of got that deep green color, right? It looks like actively growing corn, whereas the 3-inch stuff hasn't quite developed the seminal roots or the secondary fibrous roots yet to tap into our fertility. 2-inch is kind of right there. Now, I would suggest you always think about this. Early planted corn. In southeast Nebraska, anything in the first week of April would be considered early. This year was a great example that deeper planted corn, it was better to air deeper than shallow. One is we had such a roller coaster ride of air and soil temperatures from the first week of April that we had soil temperatures that were one day maybe in the high 50s and the next day down in the low 40s. And it yo-yoed like that a number of times. 3-inch corn planted on, 3-inch depth planted corn on the 9th of April is probably where I would suggest you do that for the first week to 10 days of April on an annual basis around here. Plant it a little deeper than you normally do. Now maybe you're already doing that already, and that's fine. However, then we can go to the next extreme and we can walk over and we can look at corn that is even deeper. Kind of the same response, isn't it? From the 2 to the 3, now we're going from 3-inch depth corn down to 4. Wouldn't suggest you plant corn 4 inches deep. Typically it runs into issues in emergence. Remember we talked about the kernel being a form of food to get the plant emerged. But if the corn's planted too deep, it's going to run out of carbohydrates to emerge. In this case, it did emerge, and it did fairly well. But you can also see the depth effect of fertility use in the plant at this stage, along with the root development. So we typically talk about corn in that 2.5 to 3 range as far as the planting depth on an annual basis. This is a great example this year of what those different depths did. All of these processes, whether it's the starter fertilizer, the seeding depth, the seeding population piece, we're going to take them to yield. So come October, you'll have information. So as you've seen in the pictures before, we had a healthy dose of mare's tail in our corn, and this was done by design. The pictures that you saw initially versus what you see today is kind of a before and after the treatment application. Now if you look at some of this mare's tail as far as the weed height on it, it's far beyond what we would suggest active treatments, regardless of the mode of action or the treatment being used, that you would try to apply from a post-emergent standpoint. It's too big. Now, in the era of dicamba corn and soybeans, dicamba is an option for you, and that's what happened here. This was done before the EPA regulations removed the label or put a temporary hold on the label this year. However, this was done yesterday, I should say, at a pint rate, an equivalent rate of a pint of dicamba. So, and not even 24 hours, you can see what dicamba is doing to the existing population out here. Will it kill it? Still remains to be seen. I would say when you've got this much uptake at this stage of the game, not even 24 hours after application, we got a pretty good shot at it. So it does attest to the benefits of what dicamba does from a weed control standpoint. We still have to deal with the off-target movement, primarily, as well as some of the mixing and the spray tips that are needed, setbacks that are needed, how we apply it, that will still make it an active tool for us.
Hi, this is Jason Hansen. I'm the sales intern at the Wilbur Ellis Plattsmouth location. This image and video is showing the effects of the dicamba 2 days after application on the mare's tail in the plot. Next, this image and video is showing the effects of the dicamba 6 days after application in the plot.
So an additional component to what we do from the agronomic and the retail trials is always look at seed treatments in soybeans. And we've done this for the past 12 years of looking at a treatment versus a non-treatment. It's as simple as that. We've used various modes of action, various trade name products over the years. But historically, we found in southeast Nebraska about a 4.25 yield advantage in using seed treatments. This year appears to be no different as far as how the beans have emerged. These soybeans, as an example, unifoliate leaves are truly out. First trifoliate is about to unfurl. Second trifoliate is also coming out. So at this stage of the game, we talk about herbicide injury. We also talk about physical injury due to hail, maybe bean leaf beetle feeding. Many of the treatments on the market these days also have some activity for residual bean leaf beetle feeding, although I haven't seen too much of that this year. And if you have bean leaf beetle feeding, you'll see that kind of ragged edge around those unifoliate leaves where they've been chewing. Thing to always remember about soybeans in early June is how much physical damage they can withstand. So if I go ahead and use this plant as an example, we talk about how much foliation or defoliation you have. All right, so here's your unifoliates, here's your first trifoliate, here's your second trifoliate, and here's the bud for the third coming out. When we have physical injury from hail, and we physically remove about this much of the plant tissue, and that's really close to a bad hailstorm. Well, we can make it even worse and remove one of the cotyledons. Now these cotyledons are about ready to fall off. However, they're still being used until we get another trifoliate or two hanging on it as a food source for that plant, seemingly just similar to corn. Hard to believe the day after a hailstorm, but on the 4th of June, if you had viable plants like this that lost that much tissue to the storm, I would still go ahead and leave it alone. You have more of a yield potential by leaving your initial stand alone on the 4th of June with that much leaf tissue loss. You got to take counts and have the consistency of it all, of course. But just from a one plant physical standpoint of damage, I would leave that alone. Beans have an inherent ability to recover from hail. It's called shifting the growing point. And when you have a physical injury like this, it basically shifts the growing point to the lower nodes of the plant, and then they'll bush out and continue to grow actively. Part of our annual plot is looking at the genetics that the Wilbur Ellis location here at Plattsmouth sells within the Asgrow and the DeKalb brand. With us this morning is Mark Thornburg. He's our district sales rep for this area. He's going to give you an overview on what the plot system is about and what it's meant to us, not only from a historic basis, but as we go forth through this year. So Mark?
Good morning, or afternoon, or evening, or whenever you're viewing this. As part of our virtual plot tours, virtual training this year, and virtual information flow, we're doing small files like this to walk you through the plots, walk you through some of the agronomic things that we're seeing out here as the season progresses. And I thought I'd give just a brief overview of why we do plots, extent, and kind of the makeup of the plots. So very simply, our market development plots are simply reaffirmation or reconfirmation of what the breeders have already told us and what our scientists have developed for us and told us through their marker-assisted breeding efforts in bringing the germplasm out to market. So our market development plots consist of new products that will be launched in the coming year, first-year products which were launched the previous year, and our existing current lineup. Not the entire lineup, but I guess the main majority of what we're selling. So we get a good cross-section and comparison of the current lineup to the first-year products and add in the new launch products, because the breeders have developed a very good, solid agronomic base for us to stand on and forecast off of. But that's in some limited trials and maybe not in areas that we're farming in. So we want to, if you will, farmerize the data and see it in local conditions, in a variety of tillage patterns, in different weather situations and different fertility conditions. So that's what we aim for here. And typically a market development plot will consist of 4 to 5 brand new products, 4 to 5 of the first year products, and then roughly about that same amount of existing products to get us to a number that works for the space that the farmer has out there for us to plant into. And the overall decision of what goes in, what comes out, kind of comes up to what the market needs are of the area, what the dealer wants to see, what the grower wants to see, and what our tech group thinks we should actually be looking at out there. The other thing that we discover as we do these market development plot sets, although we do focus quite a bit on yield, because yield is quite frankly what's most important to you, we also want to look at agronomically, how do the products perform right next to each other, from an agronomic standpoint of disease tolerance to response to fungicide treatment or no fungicide treatment, in response to fertility, tillage patterns, that kind of thing. And the one thing that does give us, like I said before, is a reconfirmation of what the breeders have informed us, what we can expect out of these products, and give us a little bit more of an idea of how that works locally and how consistent those products are across southeast Nebraska, which is the area that we're planning on planting these in. The thing that our market development plots shouldn't do and don't do is inform us on, okay, what are we going to plant this year? Because as I mentioned before, through marker assisted breeding, through our breeders' efforts, we've actually forecast the volume of what we're bringing to market for example, 2021, clear back in December of 2019, because obviously we've got to grow what we're going to sell the following year. So we probably shouldn't look at market development plots as, okay, let's get all the plots harvested and then decide what we're going to plant. Let's make those plans, and then the plots will again confirm, were we right in setting up that order, or are there some tweaks that we need to make to it. So as we go through the season, we'll have a closer look at some of the products in our market development plot sets, both in corn and in beans, and hope to give you an idea as we look at what agronomic characteristics and qualities they bring and what you might want. Thanks for watching.
Thanks, Mark. This is again a representation of everything genetically that is sold here in southeast Nebraska. This plot set is replicated within our branch 5 separate times at 5 different locations. We try to link that with what Mark has across his district, and that will be upwards of 20 sets of the same plot makeup, the same genetic makeup, same planting order, everything's the same. The only thing different is the management. So growers are able to review not only planting dates and fertility management strategies, and did I put a fungicide on, or was it hot, when is it dry, did it rain? All of those things go into your decision of purchases that you make for the coming years. So we do that in corn. We do the same thing with soybeans. The soybean plots are more governed towards Xtend Flex, which is coming, given approval across the world. We'll have that for you next year. And so that kind of concludes what we wanted to try to do with you here on this first tour. As we progress through the summer, we'll do this every 7 to 10 days or so. We'll look at agronomic updates, things that develop as the crop grows. And we'll also start showcasing some of the genetics that we have within these plots, so you can kind of take a peek at it. We welcome online visits. We welcome you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we'll be seeing you soon. Thank you.